Imagine this: a man walks into his own home, locks the door behind him, and then vanishes into thin air. No signs of forced entry. No blood. No struggle. His wallet and keys are still sitting on the kitchen counter. But he is gone, forever. Police tore apart every inch of that house, drained nearby lakes, searched miles of forest, even questioned his closest friends and family. Nothing. Not a trace. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. And here's the part that chills everyone who studies this case: the house itself seemed to hold secrets, secrets that would mock investigators for decades, leaving them with no suspect, no motive, and no body. This is the story of what many still call the perfect crime. Backhand index pointing right before we dive in, make sure you subscribe right now. Stories like this, dark, mysterious, and chilling, are what we uncover here. And trust me, this one will leave you awake tonight, staring at the ceiling, wondering just how someone could pull this off. The disappearance. The year was 1987. The small town of Ashcroft, tucked deep in rural Vermont, was the kind of place where doors were rarely locked and neighbors still borrowed sugar from one another. Everyone knew everyone, which is why when Daniel Whitaker disappeared, it didn't just rattle the community, it shattered their entire sense of safety. Daniel was 34 years old, a carpenter by trade, and known for his quiet, almost reclusive nature. He lived in a modest farmhouse left to him by his late parents. He wasn't wealthy, he wasn't flashy, and he certainly wasn't the kind of man you'd expect to have enemies. But behind closed doors, Daniel's life wasn't as ordinary as it looked. The last known day. On the morning of November 12th, Daniel was seen at the local hardware store buying supplies: nails, wood varnish, and a new padlock. The cashier remembered him clearly because she joked about the lock, asking, "Trouble keeping folks out?" Daniel gave a small, almost nervous laugh and said, something like that. That was the last confirmed sighting of him alive. That evening, a neighbor across the field noticed Daniel's living room light flickering on and off around 9 p.m. They thought it was strange but assumed maybe he was having electrical problems. At midnight, the light went out completely. The next morning, Daniel's truck was parked in the driveway. His tools were neatly arranged in the shed. The front door was locked from the inside. And yet, Daniel was gone. The house that lied. Police arrived within hours of the missing persons report. They expected to find some clue, some broken window, some evidence of foul play. Instead, the house seemed almost staged. Daniel's wallet was on the counter with $240 cash inside. His keys sat next to the wallet. A half-finished cup of coffee was on the table, still warm. The TV was off. No forced entry. No footprints. No struggle. But here's where it gets disturbing. Detectives noticed that every door and window was locked from the inside, including the back door, which had Daniel's brand new padlock on it. If someone had taken him, how did they leave? And if Daniel left voluntarily, why didn't he take his truck, his wallet, or his keys? The house was a paradox, both sealed shut and wide open with questions. The strange notebook. During the search, police uncovered a notebook tucked into the drawer of Daniel's workbench. At first glance, it looked like a carpenter's journal: measurements, sketches of furniture, lists of supplies. But on the final page, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "If anything happens to me, it won't be by accident. The walls know more than they should." The phrase sent chills down investigators' spines. What did Daniel mean by the walls? Did he suspect someone was after him? Or was this a paranoid man's final cryptic warning? Theories begin to spiral. Within days, the case became a frenzy of speculation. Townsfolk whispered about everything from secret lovers to cult activity. Detectives tried to anchor the investigation in reality, but every lead evaporated. 1. Voluntary disappearance. Maybe Daniel just walked away. But if so, why leave behind every essential item: money, ID, transportation? 2. Murder. If he was killed, where was the body? Police dug up parts of his property, scoured nearby woods, even drained a pond. Nothing. 3. Inside job. Could Daniel have locked the house from the inside and hidden himself somewhere, staging his own vanishing act? This theory briefly gained traction until a full forensic sweep showed no trace of Daniel's DNA anywhere beyond the kitchen. It was as if he had walked into his home and dissolved into thin air. Backhand index pointing right. Pause for a second. If you were one of the detectives, how would you explain this? Drop your theory in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you'd solve what has baffled experts for almost 40 years. The neighbor's secret. 3 weeks later, investigators uncovered something that would twist the case even further. The neighbor who'd seen the flickering lights finally admitted they hadn't told the full truth. On the night Daniel vanished, around 11:45 p.m., they swore they saw a figure standing in Daniel's upstairs window. The silhouette was tall, unmoving, and didn't look like Daniel. In fact, they said it looked like the figure was wearing something reflective, almost metallic. But when pressed further, the neighbor grew nervous and refused to elaborate. It was as if saying more out loud would put them in danger. The vanishing footprints. In December, heavy snow blanketed Ashcroft. Detectives returned to the farmhouse to check for any new evidence. That's when one officer noticed something bizarre, a set of footprints leading from Daniel's back door out into the field. They followed the tracks for about 200 yards, before they just stopped. No returning prints. No vehicle. Just empty, untouched snow. As if the person had walked into the night and vanished into the air. The whispering walls. By now, rumors had taken on a life of their own. Some townsfolk swore Daniel's house was haunted, that you could hear scratching sounds inside the walls at night. Others claimed Daniel had stumbled onto something he shouldn't have, maybe corruption in town, maybe something darker. Detectives brushed these off as hysteria, until one officer spent the night in the house during a stakeout. At around 2 a.m., he swore he heard faint tapping inside the walls of the living room, like someone knocking from within. When the walls were inspected, nothing. No pests. No wiring issues. Just silence. Backhand index pointing right. Before we continue, make sure you've hit that notification bell. Because the deeper we go into this mystery, the more chilling and bizarre it becomes. And you don't want to miss what happens in next. By the end of the first month, the official investigation had hit a dead end. The farmhouse sat empty, lights off, padlock rusting. Locals avoided it, whispering that Daniel's spirit still lingered, trapped in the house that had swallowed him whole. But behind closed doors, detectives weren't done. They had one last theory, one that suggested Daniel may not have left that house at all. And when they went back inside with fresh eyes, what they uncovered in the basement would launch this case into the realm of the impossible. The house that wouldn't speak. When detectives returned to Daniel Whitaker's farmhouse in early 1988, the case was already going cold. Weeks had passed with no new leads. But one veteran investigator, Detective Harold Greer, wasn't ready to give up. Greer believed they had overlooked something. He kept replaying Daniel's notebook in his mind, the walls no more than they should. So, on a frigid January morning, Greer and his team went back inside the farmhouse, this time with a new strategy. They weren't just looking for a missing man anymore. They were looking for secrets the house itself might be keeping. The basement discovery. The basement was small, cramped, and smelled of damp earth. It had a concrete floor and exposed brick walls, nothing unusual for an old farmhouse. But Greer noticed something odd. In one corner, the cement looked slightly newer, as if it had been patched or poured more recently. They brought in ground-penetrating radar and found a hollow cavity beneath that section. Breaking through the concrete, they discovered a narrow crawlspace, barely large enough for a man to squeeze through. Inside were two objects that would haunt the investigation forever. 1. A rusted metal chair bolted to the ground, with leather straps attached to its arms and legs. 2. A small box filled with cassette tapes, each labeled with a date. There was no sign of Daniel, but suddenly, the story had shifted from a simple missing person case to something far more sinister. The tapes. The tapes were sent to the lab for analysis. Weeks later, the FBI got involved. When the recordings were finally played, the room of detectives went silent. The tapes contained Daniel's voice. On the earliest ones, he sounded calm, almost clinical. He talked about his daily routine, about working on furniture, about loneliness. But as the recordings went on, his tone changed. He began describing sounds in the walls, scratching, whispering, footsteps when no one else was in the house. By tape number 6, Daniel's voice trembled with fear. He said he believed someone had been coming into his house while he slept. He couldn't prove it, but he woke up certain items were moved, tools missing then reappearing, doors unlocked that he swore he had secured. On the final tape, recorded just days before he vanished, Daniel's words were chilling. "They're inside. I know it now. Whoever they are, they've been watching me through the walls. If I disappear, don't believe I left. I'll still be here, somewhere in this house." The secret entry. Investigators tore apart the basement looking for hidden passages. That's when they noticed a thin draft of air coming from behind a wooden support beam. When the beam was removed, it revealed a concealed tunnel carved crudely into the earth. The tunnel stretched about 20 feet before ending at a wooden panel that opened into the walls of the farmhouse itself. Someone had been living inside Daniel's walls. The intruder theory. The working theory became horrifyingly clear. Someone had secretly occupied the crawl spaces of Daniel's home, entering and exiting without being seen. They could observe him through hidden vents and cracks, moving silently between the walls like a phantom. But here's the part that makes this so much worse. Forensic teams scoured the tunnel and crawlspace. They found remnants of food wrappers, cigarette butts, even a small sleeping mat. Whoever had been hiding there had been there a long time. And the DNA on those cigarette butts? It didn't match Daniel. It belonged to someone else entirely. Backhand index pointing right. Think about that for a second. Imagine living in your home, thinking you're alone, and all the while, someone is crawling through your walls, watching you, studying your every move. If that thought makes your skin crawl, hit the like button right now. The impossible timeline. Despite this discovery, one thing didn't add up. The DNA belonged to a man named Edward Hensley, a local drifter with a long criminal record. But there was a problem. Edward had died in a car crash 2 years before Daniel vanished. So how could his DNA be in Daniel's crawlspace? Detectives were split. Some believed Edward had indeed stalked Daniel for years, using the crawlspace as his lair, but had abandoned it before his death. Others suggested Edward's death wasn't what it seemed. Maybe he had faked it. Maybe he was still alive, hiding in plain sight. But the darker theory was this: Edward wasn't alone. Someone else had taken over the walls after him. The town in fear. When the news broke that Daniel's home had secret tunnels and evidence of an intruder, Ashcroft spiraled into panic. People began tearing apart their own houses, terrified they too might have someone in the walls. Police were flooded with calls, scratching noises, missing food, strange shadows. 99% turned out to be nothing. But a handful of reports were eerily similar to Daniel's experience. Had Ashcroft been dealing with a silent predator for years, moving from home to home, never caught? The basement chair. Then came the chair. Forensic experts examined it closely and determined it had been used. The straps were worn. Small fragments of skin and hair were embedded in the leather. But none of the DNA matched Daniel. This suggested something horrifying. Daniel may not have been the first victim of whoever used that basement. And if he wasn't the first, he might not have been the last. Backhand index pointing right. Before I reveal the next disturbing discovery, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Because the twist we're about to hit in this story will make you question everything you thought you knew about Daniel's disappearance. The final clue in the tapes. On the very last tape, Daniel mentioned one final, cryptic detail. "If they find me, I think they'll keep me. They don't kill you right away. They study you." The word study stood out to detectives. Combined with the chair in the basement, it painted a picture not of a random crime, but of something deliberate. Some investigators began to whisper theories that bordered on the unthinkable. Was Daniel the victim of a sadistic experiment? Was someone using the farmhouse as a hunting ground, luring him into madness before taking him? Or, and this is the theory that still haunts the case, did Daniel himself build that chair, stage the tapes, and vanish deliberately, constructing his own unsolvable mystery? By spring of 1988, the case was national news. Reporters called it the perfect crime, because every new discovery only raised more questions. The farmhouse was locked up, sealed as evidence, but locals swore they could still see a light flickering in the upstairs window some nights. And then, just as investigators began to believe the trail had gone cold again, a farmer 15 miles outside of Ashcroft made a chilling report. He had found something buried in his field. Something that didn't belong there. And when detectives unearthed it, the mystery of Daniel Whitaker deepened in a way no one could have imagined. The thing in the field. In the spring of 1988, months after Daniel Whitaker's disappearance, a farmer named George Mallory was plowing his field just outside Ashcroft when his tractor struck something solid buried beneath the soil. At first, George thought it was an old tree stump. But when he dug around it, what he unearthed made his blood run cold. It was a wooden box. Handcrafted. Rough, but sturdy. About the size of a trunk. George called the sheriff immediately. Within hours, detectives and forensic teams were on site. The box. When they pried it open, they expected maybe valuables, maybe old tools. What they found instead sent shockwaves through the entire investigation. Inside the box were bones. Human bones. Carefully arranged, almost ritualistic. The skull rested on top, with the jaw propped open as though frozen mid-scream. But here's the disturbing part, tests revealed the bones did not belong to Daniel Whitaker. They belonged to two different people, neither of whom had ever been reported missing in Ashcroft. This discovery blew the case wide open. A hidden pattern. The medical examiner determined the bones were from two adults, one male, one female. Both had likely died in the late 1970s. That meant whoever had placed them in the box had been operating long before Daniel vanished. Detective Greer began digging into cold cases from neighboring towns. What he uncovered was staggering, a string of disappearances dating back nearly 20 years. Lone travelers, hitchhikers, people with no close ties, they had vanished across Vermont and New Hampshire. No suspects. No closure. It was as if someone had been collecting victims, leaving no trail, until Daniel's disappearance dragged everything into the light. The shadow theory. By now, investigators believed they were dealing with more than just one crime. They were dealing with a pattern, maybe even a network. Whoever used Daniel's farmhouse had likely used others before. The chair, the tapes, the crawlspaces, they weren't improvisations. They were the signature of someone meticulous, patient, and terrifyingly organized. Some detectives believed Daniel had been chosen as a long-term target, studied for years until the night they finally took him. Others whispered that Daniel himself might have been part of this, either coerced or willing. But the most unsettling theory was this: Daniel never left that farmhouse alive. Backhand index pointing right. Stop for a moment and imagine this. You're living in your home, safe in your mind, but behind your walls, someone else has been crawling, watching, waiting. And when they finally take you, no one ever finds a trace. If that thought terrifies you, hit that share button, because more people need to hear stories like this. The cryptic symbol. The investigation into the box revealed something else. Carved into the inside of the lid was a strange symbol, 3 interlocking circles with a single vertical slash through them. When investigators showed it to experts, they couldn't identify it. It didn't match known cults or organizations. But months later, another farmer 30 miles away reported finding the same symbol carved into a tree near where a hiker had gone missing in 1979. The connection was undeniable. Whoever took Daniel, and whoever filled that box with bones, had left behind a calling card. The final tape. And then came one last gut punch. In the evidence lab, a technician reviewing Daniel's tapes discovered something previously overlooked. On the last recording, after Daniel's frightened words about being studied, there was a faint sound at the very end. It wasn't Daniel's voice. It was a low, distorted laugh. Someone else had been in the room when that final tape was made. The case goes cold. By the end of 1988, the farmhouse was sealed permanently. Detectives had no body, no suspects, no definitive answers. Daniel Whitaker had simply vanished, absorbed into a mystery bigger than anyone could have imagined. The FBI classified it as unsolved with ongoing interest. But over the decades, the case has taken on a life of its own, becoming folklore in Vermont. Some claim to see figures watching from Daniel's boarded-up windows. Others swear they hear scratching inside the walls when they drive past at night. And most chilling of all, every few years, hikers or farmers stumble upon another buried box, with bones inside. Each one with that same carved symbol. None of the remains have ever been linked to Daniel. Theories that refuse to die. To this day, 3 dominant theories remain. 1. The intruder predator. Daniel was abducted by someone living in his walls, a predator who had stalked others before and after him, leaving behind the boxes as their twisted trophies. 2. The cult theory. The symbol carved in the boxes suggests Daniel was taken by a group, not an individual. His tapes may have been part of a ritual meant to capture fear. 3. The self-constructed disappearance. Some believe Daniel orchestrated everything himself, building the chair, recording the tapes, even planting evidence, before vanishing into a new life. If so, he created the ultimate unsolved mystery. But the problem is this: there's no proof for any of them. Only questions. Backhand index pointing right. Let me ask you, which theory do you believe? Was Daniel the victim of a hidden intruder, a cult, or did he mastermind his own vanishing act? Leave your thoughts in the comments. The legacy of the perfect crime. Nearly 40 years later, Daniel's farmhouse still stands, a silent monument to terror. The padlock on the back door has rusted away. The fields have grown wild. And yet, the house draws in thrill seekers, paranormal investigators, and amateur sleuths who swear they can feel something watching them from inside the walls. For detectives, the case remains an open wound. No one was ever charged. No body was ever found. And the truth, whether Daniel is dead, alive, or something in between, has never been revealed. It's why so many call it the perfect crime. Backhand index pointing right. If this story chilled you like it did me, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because there are dozens of mysteries just like this, unsolved, unnerving, and unforgettable, and I'll be diving into them all. You don't want to miss the next one. Haunting note. In 2017, a construction crew renovating a farmhouse 3 towns over reported finding a narrow tunnel hidden behind a wall. Inside the tunnel was a mat, food wrappers, and scratched into the brick were the words, "The walls know more than they should." The exact same phrase Daniel wrote before he vanished. And with that, the mystery of Daniel Whitaker refuses to die.